And our first presentation is from the North Fork Teanaway River in eastern Washington. It's co-presented by Rebecca Wassell with the Mid-Sound Fisheries Enhancement Group and Ryan Dieknicker with the Yakima Nation. The title of their talk is A Tiered Approach to Wood, Targeted Engineering Paired with Large-Scale Replenishment in the North Fork Teanaway River. So please welcome Becca and Ryan, and you guys, your presentation is up, and feel free to start your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kay, and thanks once again for all the work you're doing to moderate. I think we all recognize that the moderators have much larger jobs than they might have anticipated, so we appreciate it. Well, I'm glad to be here talking with folks today, and I'm joined by my colleague, Ryan Dieknicker, who's a fisheries biologist with the Yakima Nation. And over the past 3 years, we've had the privilege of working on the Teanaway Community Forest over a 4-mile stretch of the North Fork Teanaway River to try to reconnect floodplains and restore stream processes. I feel like it's an incredible privilege to be able to do this, and I'm excited to share the project with you. The Teanaway watershed is located in Kittitas County in central Washington. It's a Yakima River tributary, and it's been a significant area for the Native people from this region since time immemorial, and continues to be so. It's a very important part of the seasonal round for berries and fisheries and root digging. And we are continually grateful for the leadership of the Yakima Nation in the restoration of these lands. In addition to human management of the watershed prior to European settlement, we know there was also rodent management of the watershed. Beavers were probably the dominant ecosystem driver in the Teanaway Valley. But as the fur companies started to come in, I think 1814 is the first time we have documentation of them being there, the management regime shifted. By 1900, management was primarily for timber and timber extraction. And splash damming was the dominant way of moving wood out of the watershed to the mill in Yakima from 1903 to 1916. The incredible scouring energy that was required to move those logs when the dams were blown each year and the water behind the impoundment released was strong enough that we're still seeing the impacts today. The Teanaway River is scoured down to bedrock in many locations, and when it's out being able to hold on to wood and other structure in the stream, there are places where habitat is limited by spawning gravel availability. When splash damming fell out of fashion, the railroads came in, but the railroads were all constructed right along the banks of the Teanaway River and its forks. And although the railroads were replaced by road logging, we're still seeing the berms act as constraints on the river's migration and disconnecting the river from its floodplain. Grazing has also been an important part of management in the watershed for the past 150 years or so. And you can feel that when you walk in the floodplains. You stomp your feet and you wouldn't know you weren't in a parking lot. We're not finding the squishy floodplain soils that could act to hold and retain water for late season. Instead, they're compacted and they're dominated by non-native vegetation. The state of Washington invested in the Teanaway in 2013 with the purchase of 55,000 acres, comprising the first community forest in our state. The management objectives are multifaceted, as they often are, but having state acquisition of this watershed gave us the opportunity to focus on aquatic restoration. Fisheries managers gathered and identified the highest priorities, and the North Fork Teanaway, which is shown in red on this map, has the greatest watershed area, the greatest length of stream, and has more species of concern. We still see spring chinook and steelhead using this every year, and it's critical habitat for bull trout. We intend to do restoration work in the Middle Fork and the West Fork as well, but the North Fork Teanaway was the highest priority, and we started our efforts there.
In collaboration with the Yakima Basin Fish and Wildlife Recovery Board, Mid-Columbia Fisheries and Yakima Nation contracted a geomorphologist to perform an assessment of the river. The assessment took a deep dive into the physical characteristics of the watershed and also identified project opportunities. Next slide. We also developed a 2D hydraulic model, which corroborated the findings of the geomorphic assessment really closely, and it really refined these areas where we would want to add obstructions to the river and remove floodplain fill to maximize floodplain reconnection and side channel activation.
So with the restoration areas in mind, we then started to think about how we were going to handle such a large reach of opportunity. In many cases, we've done engineered projects that cover our entire project reach, and that did not seem like the feasible or the prudent approach in this situation when we were looking at 4 miles of stream. So we considered the fact that because this was all public land with limited infrastructure, the key constraints were just making sure that people were comfortable with accepting a degree of risk. And the people who needed to be comfortable were the public land managers and the downstream landowners. So we did extensive public outreach with those groups, and then also worked with BPA to make sure that the project was not labeled as a high risk for them for their permitting. Our work started 1 mile above the private land, not necessarily the reach that had the greatest opportunity, but the reach in the North Fork Teanaway that was the most comfortable place to start from a human risk analysis perspective. And in order to balance that, should we engineer or should we not engineer, we decided yes, we should do both. And so we worked with Pat Powers of Waterfall Engineering to design 3 sets of large wood trapping structures. We had them installed at the bottom of the 4 mile reach, about a half mile up from there, and then near the top of the reach. And those structures are designed to catch mobile wood in the system as it moves down, and to also restrict the degree to which that wood can move beyond our project area. Well, if you've worked with Pat before, you know that he does a great job of communicating his structures, not just through his drawings, but also through models. So when construction began, we started sort of with the Lincoln log experiment and working with the contractors to get a sense of what an engineered wood trapping structure might look like.
Here's one of those structures finished up near the mouth of Shirt Creek. And the concept behind this design was for it to mimic an old growth piece of wood. And if you kind of squint and imagine that structure as a whole, you can almost make out a big root wad with its root wad facing upstream. But this structure, after a year, it's already collecting mobilized wood, and it's keeping a side channel at the far, or about the middle of your screen, active all the time. And we've constructed 6 of these so far. In 2019, the design was to excavate these down into the channel bed and brace them with vertical pilings. But we found that the water management for this design was incredibly difficult. Ultimately, we'd pump water out and the water would find a cattle trail and then end up back in the North Fork Teanaway muddy. So we were constantly chasing muddy water all of 2019.
Turns out there's a cattle trail pretty much everywhere.
Mm-hmm. So in 2020, last summer, Pat did a redesign that was more of a ballast and more ballast kind of design. So lots of big root wads and large boulders to get the stability needed for these structures to stick around. Here's one of those structures last week interacting with its first spring runoff. So we also have installed about 25 of these structures. So these are embedded structures that aren't engineered. They take about 2 hours to build. So the big cost associated with these is just the materials themselves. So these are called flow splitter and flow deflector structures. This is a flow splitter, what you're looking at here. And they do what their name implies. They split flow. So this one in particular will create a nice pool on the flanks of it and help build that gravel bar up and also pile up water to inundate floodplains more frequently. And this is a deflector structure that is built into the bank. Again, super cheap and quick to build, but note the nice velocity shadow on the downstream side of that. Really nice habitat. So in addition to those more static structures, we've installed about 2,000 or over 2,000 pieces of unanchored wood. And we realize we're probably not going to build the wood stocks in this river up to historic levels with our work, because at one point this river was absolutely clogged with wood. So our hope is that by getting some of this infrastructure back into the river, the biological processes can take over and we can start getting natural wood recruitment over time to build the channel back and reconnect those floodplains. So in 2020, we had really good access, and so everything was built with ground equipment. In 2019, we had a lot of cultural considerations, so we ended up using a helicopter. And at $2 per second, you want to have your game plan pretty tight before you get the helicopter in the air. But over a 2-day period, we moved over 3.4 million pounds of wood. So a pretty effective tool for getting a lot of wood back in the system. So we're also staging wood for some of those more static structures that I just described. And so there's wood specifications associated with each of those structures. And in order to stay organized and make sure that we got wood where we needed it of the right size, we came up with this color-coded scheme at the deck. So we could call out a color and the helicopter would bring us exactly what we needed, and it worked really well.
And it was also really fun because we got to take spray paint the butts of the trees with the appropriate colors. So what we also think is working well, though, Ryan, is the project. In the flows that we saw last week, we were seeing side channels activated. Immediately after construction, the beavers gave us a high five and started building dams off of our wood structures. And we think that's the ultimate endorsement. And we're inspired by this success to keep going.
So what's next? We have one more summer of work to finish up our phase 1 North Fork Teanaway work, which includes removing about 2,000 cubic yards of berm, using that gravel to augment gravel in the river, and adding 6 more of those splitter deflector structures. Concurrently, we have the West Fork and Middle Fork geomorphic assessment under contract with NSD. So as soon as we finish next year, we can jump right into the West Fork and Middle Fork without skipping a beat.
Yeah, so thank you very much for your time. And I am excited to see all 124 of you, although I can't really see you. But please let us know if there are any questions. And thank you to the funding we've received from Surfboard, from the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan, BPA, NOAA, and Trout Unlimited, who have also been volunteers on the project.